Do you see the soft green breathing against the stars, a faint halo unspooling where the dark is kindest to the eye? I'm here beside you, voice low as an interstellar traveler drifts inward without hurry. No rush, no alarms, just a quiet scene and the steady comfort of knowing we can take our time. If you're listening to unwind, set your phone to Do Not Disturb, ease the brightness down, and let headphones cradle the room a little closer. There's a sleep playlist waiting. It will carry you through in gentle arcs. Keep the volume lower than you think you need. Let the body choose the pace. Let the mind lean on simple images and calm facts. Tonight we trace a visitor's passage by small lights and softer sounds. We'll move from the first green shimmer to the hush of instruments, from the warmth near the sun to the long glide back out again. I'll speak in even steps. When a detail is firm, I'll say so. When a possibility is only that, I'll hold it lightly. Your task is easier than mine. Just follow the line of calm and breathe with it. If thoughts wander, let them. Like dust curling in a beam, they pass and settle. We'll keep returning to the same gentle landmark, a quiet glow, a sure path, and the shared feeling that the sky is wide enough for rest. I'll carry the watch. You can rest your eyes now. We begin. Begin at the edge of a soft green. A hush of colour hangs around a small, stubborn point, the way light can gather where space is otherwise plain. Follow the rim with your eyes and let it widen. The halo is not sharp. It loosens into a faint veil, and beyond it, a slimmer trace leans away from the sun. Nothing hurries here. Nothing flashes for attention. We simply let the light show us where gas and dust have lifted from a cold, compact heart, then drifted outward until sunlight made them visible. I guide your gaze across the circle first. The glow is fuller near the center, then gentles outward in a smooth gradient. In that gradient lives a kind of story. Molecules catch solar rays and re-emit them as color, a quiet transaction that turns invisible radiation into something the eye can hold. Close to the core, grains scatter light in every direction, and the scene becomes powder soft. Step a little farther with your attention, and the veil thins toward the tail, where particles line up and the brightness falls away. Now ease along the tail's first span. It does not shout. It suggests. The tail narrows as it leans, a penciled stroke laid over the night. Even when the telescope's field is still, you can feel the structure drifting, because the light itself changes with angle, with distance, with the simple geometry of sun, object, and watchful planet. The impression is of breath you can see, in and out, a light that swells and settles. Under the calm, there is a reason to call it a traveller from beyond. The path it follows is not a closed loop like our planet's trace. It is open, a shallow sweep that will not return. Astronomers call that a hyperbolic path, which is just a careful way to say this object arrived with enough speed that the sun's pull will bend it, but not bind it. It came from another star's suburbs. It will leave for somewhere we do not need to name. That single fact can feel large, yet it sits easily when we let light do the telling. Shift the gaze a finger width to the side. Notice the way brightness changes when the line between you and the sun grows steeper. When the phase angle is small, scattered light seems even. When the angle opens, the veil looks grainier, as if the texture of dust steps forward. Nothing here is a surprise to the physics of reflection, but it is tender to watch. The sky teaches by degrees, not by declarations. If the eye strains, soften it. You do not need numbers to feel the scene. The coma can be many thousands of kilometers across, but the scale does not matter in the room with you now. What matters is steadiness. The brightness rides on gases set free by warming, and on dust caught and carried by those gases. That is all. A gentle light, made from simple things behaving as they must beneath a star. I want you to know how many quiet lights watch with you. On different mountaintops and in patient orbits, instruments share the work. Some look in visible wavelengths, mapping texture. Others listen in infrared, where warmth writes its lines. There are radio dishes that can hear the thin murmur of certain molecules. None of them act alone. They trade time the way friends trade sentences, each continuing where another left off. The coordination that people sometimes call a protocol is, at heart, a choreography of light. Let your attention return to the halo again. That gentle green often comes from small carbon molecules that glow when sunlight touches them. The color is not loud by nature, but in the right darkness it feels present, almost kind. It will change with time. It will thin as the object passes and cools. For now, it is enough to let the color sit where it is and trust that every photon carries a piece of the story from nucleus to eye. It is natural to wonder if such visitors mean worry. The answer is soft and small. This one does not. Its path misses our world by far, and its gravity is too slight to stir what should not be stirred. The work here is observation, not alarm. When you feel a question tug at your thoughts, you can set it down beside the halo and watch it fade like dew in brightening light. The sky holds both the object and your question without strain. If you'd like, follow one last loop around the scene. Start at the core and walk the brightness outward with your eyes. Let your sense of focus relax, so the light becomes a tone rather than a shape. Notice how the tone changes when your breath slows. Let the boundaries blur a little. Somewhere out there, away from our lamps and screens, those same tones move across sensors and mirrors. Somewhere in here, you match them with an easy calm. We will visit devices and details soon enough. For now, stay with what light alone can say. A visitor glows because the sun asks it to, because atoms that slept in deep cold have found a warmth that wakes them into color. The halo drifts, thins, and falls back into the general dark, and the dark receives it, quiet as cloth taking dye. The green eases toward a pale blue, and the scene dims. The room is quiet enough to hear the work. First comes a soft click from the infrared ear, the way electronics settle when a sensor takes its place. Niospec opens its small gates to the deep red and beyond. Miri steadies its cool heart. Their language is count and wavelength, yet to me it reads like a low, sustained note that you feel more than you hear. Hubble holds the visible bands like a steady tone. Its mirrors do not sing, but the cadence of exposures feels musical all the same. Measure, measure, small pause, measure again. A simple rhythm you can breathe with. Photometry is nothing dramatic. It is the art of keeping time with light, of trusting that if you count long enough, the pattern under the flicker will show itself. On the ground, the wide-field camera that watches almost everything keeps its own beat. It sweeps, not in a rush, but with a practiced tempo. The frame is large, the stars slide the same way a record turns beneath a needle. Every pass lays down a line, then another, and in these lines, the faint traveler is just one more sound woven into the larger album. Near the sun, the glare is a drum that never quiets. The coronagraph raises its metal disc to hush that drum, turning down the blaze so weaker parts can be heard. In the partial silence, thin structures emerge. Faint strings point away from the star, and even if they last only minutes in view, their shape tells you where the charged particles prefer to run. The instrument does not need words, it needs only contrast, and a little patience for the way weak signals come and go. Far away, dishes in dry air lean into particular frequencies. Millimeter waves travel with an unhurried dignity, and the receivers record them like slow knocks at a door. Carbon monoxide, maybe hydrogen cyanide. A narrow set of notes that, when their spacing is right, explain more than their quiet volume suggests. The array works by adding whispers together. Many small voices become one clear tone. Between all these sounds moves a faster messenger that never truly sleeps, the flow from the sun. A probe skims and samples that stream, not to chase the visitor, but to tell everyone else how the medium hums today. Density, speed, magnetic direction. These are the weather reports the other instruments need, because the way tails bend and filaments shiver depends on what the wind is playing through the system. None of this happens alone. The schedule is a score. Time blocks shift, handoffs happen, and observers step away so others can step in without breaking the line. A small office on Earth keeps the pages in order. It listens to reports from mountaintops and from orbit, and it answers with coordinates, with revised tempos, with gentle corrections that keep everyone counting the same measures. You may imagine a room with red lights and screens, but the real feeling is quieter than that. It is closer to sitting at the back of a rehearsal hall, where every part knows when to speak and when to rest. Infrared listens first, because heat carries early. Visible follows as the glow builds. Radio gets its turn when molecules have enough freedom to voice their spin. The space weather monitor provides the metronome. The ring of quiet around all this is not silence, it is alignment. Let's stay a moment with the infrared, because warmth is often the earliest footstep. When the traveller comes closer to the sun, grains and ices at the surface release what they have stored in cold. That release is not a shout, it is a rise in a continuum, a slope that instruments can trace like a tone that starts deep and climbs just a little. Even without seeing any detail, the shape of that climb tells a story about what wakes first and what waits. Now let Hubble's steady vision take a bar. Focus and defocus in your mind, the way a lens breathes when it tracks a faint target. In the clean band of visible light, brightness is counted with care. If the count swells and settles on a repeating timescale, that may point to rotation. If it rises and holds without a loop, that may mean a general warming of the surface. These are not verdicts. They are gently held possibilities that grow sturdier when other instruments nod along. The wide field sweep returns. It is the one that catches change you did not think to expect. A small surge, a gap that comes at the same time every few nights, a faint offset in where the center of light seems to be. Alone, each is just a quirk. Together, they hum. They give the rest of the orchestra a cue to listen for the same motion at a different pitch. Back to the coronagraph then. It keeps time with brightness near the star, and sometimes the timing aligns so that a visitor drifts into its muted stage. If it does, the shape of the ion tail writes a quick notation across the field, thin, and aligned with the wind, and the dust tail adds a thicker stroke, both changing as the solar weather changes, so that in a handful of frames you can hear, in a way, how the environment shifts around the object without the object saying anything beyond what physics lets it say. The dishes answer once more, unhurried. Lines that were faint sharpen, those that dominated recede. The balance can tell you which gases drive the glow, because some molecules release easily under mild heat, and others wait for stronger encouragement. And although the receivers record only frequencies and intensities, every change in the spectrum is like a chord that adds or subtracts one note at a time until a motif becomes clear enough to follow without strain. And in that clarity you can rest your thinking, because the data simply sing their own intervals. Between cycles, the probe's reports land in the queue. They look like numbers, but to those who know the rhythm, they feel like the tick of a hand on a wall clock. Faster wind today, field leaning this way. That means ion tails may flex more. That means the coronagraph watchers will pay attention to thin strands that wander. The communication is plain and without drama, and because it is so plain, it calms the room. Each device knows what to expect from the space between it and the sun. When a day closes, the counts pass to a place that keeps the catalogue of where things are and where they will be. Ephemerides are the sheet music for pointing. They fold in all the gentle nudges the object can give itself when jets push a little here or a little there. With that folded in, tomorrow's pointing is better, and the next handoff cleaner, and the noisiest moments feel less like noise and more like the breath between two notes that belong together, even if they came from different instruments, because across observatories and wavelengths and continents, the quiet ring is the same ring, the same repeating kindness of data, turning towards sense one small step at a time, so soft that the only proper response is to slow your own breathing and match it to the pace of these machines that do not tire and do not hurry, and to let that pace carry you through the rest of the night without needing a single word more than necessary to say that the work is proceeding, measured and sure. The spectrograph ticks once. What kind of road sets a small traveller loose between stars, and how does such a road begin? Often the answer is simple and wide. A young system was busy. Big worlds shift their lanes. Small worlds weave between them. A close pass steals momentum. Another returns it, and the tiniest body is handed from path to path until the last turn sends it outward for good. That is one familiar route. Gravitational handoffs between giants that end beyond any return ticket. There are other departures. In some systems, the big worlds migrate, sliding inward or outward, like ferries changing docks. When they move, resonances sweep across the smaller traffic and create jams that fling debris away. In pairs of stars, tides can tug a fragment onto a crossing track that ends in open space. Each story is still a journey, made from ordinary steps that line up into an exit when timing allows. Where could such a traveller have started its long arc? The first stretch before we ever noticed. Observatories show that many young, bright stars carry broad belts of rubble, the raw lanes where ice, dust, and rock collide. Around names we have learned to say aloud, wide rings glimmer and scatter. Those are natural launch points, not proof. Just the kind of crossroads where small pieces learn to move under the influence of larger ones and sometimes, rarely, get thrown beyond the rim. If a fragment leaves, its chemistry leaves with it. Far from home, it still carries the balance of light and heavy versions of common atoms, the subtle mix a birthplace imparts. On Earth, we read such mixes in meteorites as if they were postmarks. In comets close to home, the same approach hints at where they froze and how they were warmed. For interstellar visitors, the principle is the same, though the reading is harder. We listen for tiny differences in lines of light, and from those differences we outline a map that looks more like a set of probabilities than a single address. Time is a quiet co-author of every route. The span between a push outward and a meeting with our sun is not a straight highway. It is a long drift through a city of moving lights. A traveller can pass by other stars, skim the edge of clouds, and feel slow tides from the galaxy's mass. Each encounter tilts the path a little. Each adds or subtracts speed. Over enough distance, even gentle influences write their edits into the course, and the arc we now trace is the result of countless small negotiations made far from our notice. We have met travellers before, and they taught patience. One arrived with angles and habits that suggested a dry surface and no clear plume. It moved as if shaped oddly, and it kept its own counsel. Another came with the familiar breath of a comet, a clear sign that ices were warming and releasing gas. Between those two, we learned that the category from away is wide. Some routes make quiet stones. Others make softly active bodies that behave like the visitors we know, only with a different backstory before the border. Listen to how the long arc sounds when we speak it aloud. It begins near a forming star, where collisions are still common and the lanes are crowded. A large world takes shape and draws many pieces near. One piece skims close, gathers speed, and trades its bound loop for an open curve. It leaves the local roads, crosses the slow traffic of a neighborhood, and enters the wide ring of galactic travel where everything drifts together around the center. That is enough story to fall asleep to. The rest is detail and time. Now consider what might happen after departure, but before the inward swing toward our daylight. The surface can darken under radiation. Pores can open where heat once was driven out and left empty space behind. The next star it passes may not touch it at all, but the slow pull alters where the path will intersect a future plane like ours. None of this demands spectacle. Small steps accumulate. The long arc keeps its shape through balance rather than force, and balance is the most restful force we know. When finally the road bends toward our inner lanes, the traveller carries only what any road keeps: signs of weather, an accent from home, and a willingness to be guided by whatever traffic rules prevail near the next light. We hear the accent in the colour of the glow. We sketch the weather in the way gas and dust lift. We infer the rules by watching how small nudges change the path. If the long arc stays steady, it tells us that the pushes are gentle and well distributed. If it shifts a little, it tells us about vents and sunlight and shape. I want you to keep the image uncomplicated. A long, open curve. A set of possible hometowns marked not by names, but by habits. Hotter or cooler nurseries, larger or smaller neighbours, quieter or busier belts of debris. The arc itself is the truth we stand on. Everything else is a map we draft, while the traveller glides by. The best maps are drawn slowly, with a pencil that erases easily, and with room left on the margins to add the notes we did not know we would need when we began. somewhere down this road, after the closed turn near the sun and the gentle climb back outward, the path will widen and the lights will thin. Our part of the journey will end, and the traveller will carry on. That is not a loss. It is the nature of open routes to go beyond any one watcher's horizon. And the simple comfort is that for a little while we share the same corridor, trading only enough information to nod and step aside without hurry. While the long arc continues into quiet, we do not have to fill with anything more than a final, soft question. Where might the road take it next? Postcard. The window is small and bright, a trimmed edge in the day's cloth where our visitor passes nearest to the loom of the sun. I set this scene like a note on the back of a card you might keep in a book. The margins are quiet. The centre is busy, but not hurried. We are standing at the point in the weave where heat draws out the finer threads. For a minute, let the room be its own fabric. Curtains rest in a slight fold. Air moves like silk laid flat. The hum of distant traffic is a faint seam that does not need unpicking. Screen light softens, as if a thin muslin were stretched over it. Your breath is a shuttle, going and returning, steady, even. Nothing new is asked of you. The postcard sits, and the cloth of the night holds. Near a star, ices do what they always do when warmed. They lift. The surface answers heat with a slow release that gathers into a veil around the core, a veil that thickens where threads are densest and thins where the weave opens. Sublimation is a tidy craft. The grains it carries act like tiny knots that catch and scatter sunlight, and what begins as structure too small to see becomes a visible drape. You don't have to count molecules. You only need to watch the way the drape hangs and changes. The window for watching is narrow, because the sun is a bold bolt of cloth that washes out subtler textures. Observers turn down the glare by placing a disk, a firm patch over a too bright patch, so fainter strands can be read. Even then, contrast shifts with angle. The veil may appear smooth in one stitch of time and more textured in the next, not from any drama, but because our view slides along a different grain of light, and the pattern shows another side of its weave. At this near point, instruments that sense warmth find their best purchase. In the infrared, the continuum rises the way a thicker thread raises a rib in knit fabric. Gas releases write fine lines across that rib. Each line is a small selvage, marking where a particular molecule lets go of a photon. In the ultraviolet, sunlight breaks certain bonds quickly, and the fragments glow for a brief span before fading, like flecks that catch on a cuff and drift away. Together, these bands let us feel the cloth from both sides, one side by touch, the other by the way light plays along the nap. Because the window is brief, timings are stitched together. Schedules slide, handoffs are hemmed so edges meet cleanly, and when one instrument must rest its eyes, another picks up the run. This is not an emergency. It is tailoring. A target of opportunity is simply a careful rethreading of the day, so the seam we care about is reinforced, and when the day is done, the garment of routine is still whole. Closer to the sun, the veil can fray into two textures. Dust follows its own weight and the push of light, laying down a broad, matte ribbon. Charged gases align with the fields carried on the solar wind, drawing a finer, glossier filament. The two sit together like different fibers twisted into the same yarn. Their proportions shift with heating and distance, and by tracing which texture holds the line, we learn what fibers are strongest at this stage of the pass. No one promises a perfect swatch. Clouds on Earth, geometry in space, and the sun's own bright cloth all limit how much detail any one eye can lift. That is why the loom is shared. One station reads the rib of warmth, another maps the visible drape, a third listens for lines written in radio-faint stitches. A fourth samples the solar wind, so the tension in the threads is known. When the day is assembled, the tapestry shows more than any square could alone, and you can rest in the honesty of that assembly, because each patch speaks in its own plain weave. After the near pass, the pattern eases. As the traveller steps outward along its open hem, the drape lightens. Some fibres return to quiet. Others continue to slip from the surface until the heat falls below their asking. Brightness often crests and fades across days or weeks. The tail's gloss turns more to matte. What lingers is a memory of the weave, a faint pilling of dust along a line, a thin filament that stretches until it is lost in the larger cloth. We keep the postcard because it marks a place in the fabric, not because it needs to say more than it already says. If you tilt it a little, you may notice the grain running diagonally. That is the geometry of our view. If you run a finger along its edge in your mind, you can feel where the day's work was hemmed and where a loose thread was trimmed away. The pass is not a knot to be untied. It is a smooth seam that holds the garment together while the wearer moves. Let me leave you with the simplest form of this card. A near point, a brief window, a veil that thickens and thins as the heat plays through it. Threads that show their nature in how they hang and how they let go. A team of careful hands keeping the seam even. And then a quiet widening as the cloth relaxes and the line becomes part of the general field again, gentle as a fold, settling back after being lifted. At this hour, listen a moment to the room and the room beyond the room. A soft ventilation, a fan far off, a faint pressure you only notice when it changes. That is close to how the solar wind sounds in the mind, not a gust, a hush that never quite stops. In that hush, our visitor wears a second voice, thin, directed, and responsive to the current that threads the system. The wind is a steady outflow from the sun, a stream of charged particles carrying a magnetic rhythm inside it. Ions released from the traveller hear that rhythm and align. They arrange themselves into a narrow line that points not exactly away from the sun, but along the tune the fields are playing today. The result is a slender, singing trace. It may kink, it may sway, but it keeps the beat of the space between. Dust does not listen to music in quite the same way. Grains hear pressure from light and a gentler gravity, and they fall into a broader murmur. That murmur becomes the thicker accompaniment, an easy backing line that widens and fades with distance. Side by side, the two voices make a duet, a tight, bright lead from ions following the field's measures, and a low, roomy bed from dust slowly letting go of its notes. If you could watch the ion line closely, you would see small phrases inside the larger phrase. The field changes direction, the line bends, the density dips, the brightness softens, a wave passes, a ripple slides down the tail like a whisper travelling along a string. None of it is violent. It is closer to fingerwork, to slight adjustments that carry far, because the medium is light and the notes are fine. There are brief stages where we can hear these lines more clearly. Near the sun, a coronagraph quiets the glare so the slender tail can speak. Frames come like measures in a simple time signature. 1, 2, rest, 1, 2, rest. And across a handful of measures, a small filament may detach and move, a sign that the wind has turned, or that a magnetic boundary has passed the traveller like a gentler front in quiet weather. No promise is made for these moments, but when they come, the ear recognizes the pattern quickly. Farther out, the listening changes. Radio arrays lean toward frequencies where common ions announce themselves with clean pitches. Carbon monoxide stripped of an electron has a particular call. Water's fragments have others. The detectors translate those calls into lines on a plot, and the balance between them tells us which chorus is strongest at a given hour. Sometimes one voice dominates. Sometimes the harmony shifts as the visitor warms or cools. This is not drama. It is mixing. Field lines are not rails so much as measures you can tap along. As the wind carries them, the traveller's narrow tail follows, and when the field structure is ragged, small striations appear, like quick trills laid over a sustained note. In a few comets, complete breaks have been seen, disconnection events, when the magnetic tune changed so sharply that the old line was cut and a new one began, a clean bar line across the staff. Even then, the sense is of music changing key, not of anything breaking apart. Instruments that watch the wind directly provide the metronome. A probe reports speed, density, and direction. Numbers that, to those who listen daily, feel like tempo markings at the top of a score. Faster stream today. Field, leaning a little more sunward. Those marks guide the rest. Coronagraph watchers expect a tauter line. Radio listeners look for a shift in which ions carry the melody. The information is practical and quiet, and it trims away guesswork so the rest of the orchestra can settle into the right tempo. What turns neutral gas into an ion line is simple. Light strong enough to knock an electron free. Ultraviolet photons do that work, and once a molecule becomes an ion, the wind's fields bring it into the music. The lifetime of any given member of that chorus is short, but the chorus keeps its voice because the surface keeps releasing new notes to replace those that fade, and the line persists as long as the visitor's warming supports it. You don't need the lifetimes on a chart to feel the effect. It is enough to know that the lead stays as long as the song has air. Observers read the duet in comfortable order. First, the broad dust accompaniment sets the room. Then, if the lighting and angles cooperate, the ion line comes forward and gives a sense of the day's tempo. Later, when the system calms or the traveller recedes, the lead quiets and the accompaniment carries the rest, a bass line easing toward silence. The same pattern has played in many apparitions, and familiarity is restful. Repeatable music lets the mind trust that it can drift without missing anything the scene needs it to understand. Sometimes a faint tremor crosses both parts at once. A front in the wind, a slow shift in how the field is draped. Tiny cues that instruments capture as changes in brightness or angle or line strength. The data move through the network like a baton, passed hand to hand. One instrument alerts another. Small adjustments are made, and the score continues without hurry. Because the purpose of this ensemble is not a performance for an audience, but a careful keeping of measures, each measure making the next more intelligible, until the whole passage can be read in one long breath that leaves no strain behind. Only the impression of a system that knows its tune and repeats it, with variations subtle enough to soothe. If you step back, The entire near-sun corridor becomes a concert played at low volume. The star provides the power and the pitch center. The traveler contributes material that can take a charge and sing. The space between carries the sound. Our machines are the microphones placed at reasonable distances, each with its own character, each adding a little of the room back into the recording. It is a quiet craft to align those inputs so the final mix is faithful and calm, and that craft is the great comfort here. Practiced hands, steady levels, clear ears. Set the thought down now and return to the simplest sensation. A low hush gathers at the edge of hearing. A thin tone rides within it, steady but changing with the day. Somewhere a distant meter ticks in time, and then, as if the hall were emptying between sets, the air itself relaxes, and the quiet holds for a minute or so, unbroken, unforced, and kind. Begin with something almost too small to picture. Not the whole glow, not even the plume, just a single grain resting near the surface, a rough speck with facets no larger than a dust mote's daydream. Light touches it and skims along its edges. Some wavelengths slide past, some are turned aside. When the grain is small compared to the light itself, the turn is even and pale, as if the ray pressed through gauze. When the grain grows to rival the light's size, the response thickens. Brightness favors certain directions, the way a thread in a fabric catches the lamp when you move the cloth. Turn that grain in your mind. At certain angles, it will send more light forward than back, a quiet forward gleam that makes halos appear fuller when the Sun-Object-Earth angle opens wide. Rotate again and the scatter softens, becoming nearly even. This is the beginning of texture in a coma, the simplest rule that many grains following many angles can weave a look that changes with our vantage, not because the traveler hurries, but because we do, drifting around the sun on our own path. Now let the scene add a handful of grains. Some are fine as smoke, some coarse as powder. The smallest lend a smooth cast, like silk laid flat. The larger add sparkle, like a linen that shows its weave. Together they shape the phase curve, the way brightness rises and falls with geometry. And that curve tells you, without numbers if you like, why a tale looks fuller one night and more transparent the next. What you are seeing is not mood. It is the cloth of light playing over a mixed yarn of dust. Shift your attention from dust to the faint wash of color in the veil. Deep within that wash life small carbon-bearing molecules that glow when the sun's ultraviolet nudges them awake. Diatomic carbon can paint the coma with a soft green. Cyanogen adds its own threads. These hues are not stains in the fabric. They are active stitches, renewed constantly as the parent ices release fresh molecules, then fade as the light breaks the bonds and the fragments drift apart again. If the green seems gentle, it is because each stitch is brief and the pattern is rebuilt moment by moment. Warming sorts the order of release. Far from the sun, carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide, ices that lift at lower temperatures, can set the first flow. Closer in, water joins and then leads, its vapor carrying dust upward like lint lifted on steam. In the infrared, this procession shows itself as a smooth rise in warmth with lines superimposed, fine ribs that map which molecules are singing at a given hour. In the visible, that same procession looks like brightness swelling in a way that is steady rather than sudden, a fabric that thickens thread by thread. Outward from the surface, jets write narrow streaks through the weaving. They are not flames, they are organized drafts, curtains rising from vents where heat reaches pockets of volatile ice. In those drafts, grains accelerate and decouple, heavier ones falling back into wider patterns, lighter ones riding farther before the push of sunlight spreads them thin. As the body rotates, vents come into daylight and slip back into shadow, and the draft's direction turns with that spin. The result is a subtle spiral in the inner coma, a pattern that looks still in a single frame, but makes quiet sense across hours. There is a rarer thread that astronomers have found in other comets, atoms of iron or nickel loose in the gas, detected not because anyone scraped the surface, but because, under sensitive eyes, faint lines appear where those metals, freed in tiny amounts even at modest warmth, leave their signatures in the light. The finding doesn't demand a hot furnace in the nucleus, only that complex grains or organometallic compounds can release such atoms when sunlight and chemistry work together across space that seems cold to us, but is warm enough to coax out traces that, taken with the rest of the spectrum, widen the palette we use to read what the traveller is made of, and how gently it gives itself to light as it passes our star. Step back a pace. The near-nucleus region becomes a soft bulb, brightest at centre, fading outward as the grains thin in number, and the excited molecules find fewer partners to pass their energy along. Sunward, a slight dark notch can appear where the flow pushes back against the breeze of space. Anti-sunward, the dust draws into a broad strip, and the ions into a narrow filament. Two fibres twisted, but distinct. The eye moves between them as if fingering warp and weft, learning, without hurry, which part carries weight today. Observers use these textures as handholds. An instrument that favours the red can follow warmth and dust. Another that listens deeper in the infrared catches the lines of CO or CO2 when they lead. A third, tuned to the visible, watches the green wash that comes and goes as ultraviolet writes and unwrites its quick stitches. Overlaid, the maps form a practical tapestry. This is where the jet was strongest. This is where the grain sizes changed. This is when the molecules shifted their balance. If you imagine the whole coma as a garment, the tail is its train. Radiation pressure combs the dust backward, smoothing the coarser fibres into a wide lay, while the magnetic tune of the wind draws the finer charged strands into a glossy hem. The train does not snap. It relaxes as distance grows and as fresh material slows its rise. With time, the green stitches thin, the warm rib lowers, and the cloth returns to a plainer weave. None of this is disappointment. It is the natural easing of a fabric after it has been held to the light. On some nights, the forward scattering of larger grains adds a subtle crest in brightness when the angle is just so. On others, the tone is flatter, and the coma looks like a lamp seen through frosted glass. These changes are as informative as any table. They tell those at the instruments how to place their next exposure, which filter to favour, when to open a wider slit to catch more of the diffuse glow, and when to narrow it to press down on a specific line that has begun to rise in the spectrum. All the while, the smallest events near the surface, a vent waking, a patch shading over, become the slowest changes far from the core. Out there, at millions of kilometres in the dust lane, the fabric shows a faint banding where yesterday's draft differed from today's by just a little. The record is continuous because space is patient, and because our way of watching, wide frames, long counts, many eyes, lets the traveller write in longhand, even when the pen is thin and the paper is moving, and if the surface exhales in small pulses, then the glow will breathe with it. The light will lift a little, settle a little, and repeat until the heat changes its mind. That pattern is not a drama. It is a quiet physiology of ice and sunlight, where vents wake and rest in turn. Let the room go very still for a minute. The night air is a cool hush. A tiny current gathers near the floor and drifts along the wall. Fabric softens against the chair. Your breath trails like thin vapor over a lake before dawn. Nothing presses. The mind can float in that pale drift and return when it chooses. Out where our traveller moves, pulses often start as a pocket. Near the surface, warms just enough to let gas slip through fresh pores. A fine powder lifts with it, spreads, and becomes part of the larger haze. If the pocket cools, the slip slows. If the body turns another vent into light, the cycle begins anew. Viewed from far away, those rises and rests are a faint tide in the brightness, regular enough to suggest a rotation, gentle enough to keep the scene calm. If one vent is stronger than the others, then the object's spin turns that vent into a lighthouse of mist. Each time the lit side faces us, the haze thickens. When it turns aside, the haze thins. The curve this makes, up, down, up, can be read by a simple count of light over hours. Many small bodies rotate in spans of hours rather than minutes, which is slow enough that your own breathing feels like a friend to the data. We are not rushing. We are keeping company with a clock that never hurries. Sometimes the exhale is sharper. A deeper layer cracks and opens, and for a short while the haze surges. This is an outburst, and in comets closer to home it has been seen many times. The reasons are steady and ordinary. Gas trapped under a crust finds a path, heat reaches a richer seam, or a patch of dusty frost fails and slumps away. Even when a surge is noticeable in the count, it is still only material finding an easier route to the sky, and the sky receiving it without complaint. Under the surface, heat does not travel far in a single spin. It seeps. A small depth warms and cools with day and night, while deeper layers ignore that rhythm and change more slowly. That distance, how far warmth gets in one cycle, is the skin depth. It matters because it sets the tempo of the exhale. Shallow layers make quick, fine mist. Deeper stores answer on longer beats. When a model matches the breath we see, it is usually because the chosen skin depth suits the pace of release the object can sustain without strain. If the skin is thin and porous, then a new sunrise on the surface can make the haze climb quickly. If it is compact and darker, then the warming lingers and the exhale stretches into the evening side. The lift you see in the coma tells you which story is closer to the truth. You do not need equations to feel the logic. It is the same way frost vanishes faster from a thin leaf than from shaded soil. Different bodies keep their cool by different habits. Outbursts can twist the nearby haze into a loose spiral. The body turns, the vent keeps releasing. The particles carry the record of that turn outward into a widening curl. If the pulse repeats, we see several turns of that soft spiral before the larger drift stretches it beyond recognition. Instruments add what the eye cannot hold in place. Time-lapse stacks the faint rings. Spectra tell which vapor joined the exhale first. Together, they settle the nerves. There is a rhythm here, and the rhythm is kind. On rare days, a visitor can shed a fragment. Heat and spin team up, or tidal stresses near the sun add a small pull, and a brittle piece breaks away. We have watched some comets split. We have watched others thin and fade until no core remained to follow. Those events live near the bright star, among sun grazers that skim too close, or bodies with weak grip on themselves. They do not foretell harm at our distance. They are simply part of how fragile mixtures of ice and dust can end a long journey, natural, unsentimental, and instructive when we have time to listen. If the glow rises and falls by a steady amount, then the push on the path from escaping gas will also repeat, small and even. Navigators fold that into their pointing, and the ephemeris grows calmer week by week. If the rises vary, then we learn more about the surface. Perhaps two vents trade places, as daylight's favourite, or perhaps a seam is closing and another opening. In both cases, the lesson is the same. The body is not a single valve. It is an archipelago of tiny sources breathing beneath a sun. You might wonder whether sharp pulses mean strain that could undo the whole. The gentle answer is no, almost always no. Most mists remain mists. Most cracks are local and brief. When larger breakups happen, they do so for combinations of reasons that are themselves ordinary. Rotation that slowly quickens under uneven jets, a weak interior scaffold, a pass too near the glare. Even then, for watchers far away, the tale is still one of light and dust changing shape, not of anything that asks for worry. If the pattern of breathing slows after the near pass, then the season has turned for this traveller. Less heat means less vapour. Less vapour means fewer grains carried free. The mist thins. The pulses gentle. We keep counting, because the way they fade contains as much truth as the way they rose. That fade says which ices remain near the top, which have retreated, and which never answered much at all. I want the picture to stay simple in your mind. Imagine a cool stone with shallow veins of frost. The sun reaches it and paints those veins into air. The stone turns and the air trails away. Where the air was richer, the glow is thicker. Where the stone puts the vein into shade, the glow steps down. Across a day that repeats until the path curves outward again, the stone learns to breathe less, then less again, and eventually the air is quiet as it was before, except for a soft trace that lingers like a hint of mist over water long after dawn has taken its colour back. A trace that reminds us that even in silence there is a memory of breath, and that this, more than any single surge, is the story worth keeping close when you are ready to sleep. Because steadiness is what makes sense of the night. And steadiness is what the sky offers most of all. That is enough for tonight. Tonight I offer 3 handrails for the road ahead. 3 simple grips you can hold while we trace a path that does not close. They do not squeeze. They steady the wrist so the map stays readable in low light. If thoughts wander, the handrails are there when you return. Handrail 1 is the idea of excess speed. Picture a wide highway past the sun, where most travellers enter and leave on loops. If the loop is closed, the speed at the far edge falls to a number that belongs to the sun alone. But when a body arrives already carrying more than that, what dynamitists call V infinity, its curve never closes. The road bends around the sun and opens again, an inbound lane flowing into an outbound lane with no toll booth between. You do not need the digits, you only need the rule. If there is speed left over after the sun has taken its share, the path is open and the traveller continues. Handrail 2 is inclination. Most traffic here lives near a single plane, a flat, shared boulevard where planets keep company. An interstellar visitor is under no obligation to honour that lane. It may arrive tilted high above it, or pass beneath, crossing the local sheet on a slant that makes the geometry fresh. This matters for watching. A steep approach can mean better darkness at certain hours, or more crowding near the sun at others. The path may be elegant, but inconvenient. Knowing it is tilted helps us plan where to stand with our cameras, and when to rest them. Handrail 3 is the small push that is not gravity. When sunlight warms ices, jets of gas can act as tiny thrusters. Most are so gentle that only careful counting reveals them, but over days and weeks they add up, nudging the road line by line. In the notebooks, these nudges are written as 3 components: radial, a long track, and out of plane, so the model can bend the map by just enough to keep the pointing true. The letters are abstractions. The feeling is practical. Fold the breeze into the journey and the signposts align. With those 3 grips, the rest of the corridor becomes easier to read. V infinity tells us that the traveller will not circle back, so the observing calendar works like a one-way itinerary: approach, near pass, departure. Inclination tells us when the line of sight passes through the veil at a shallow angle, and when it cuts more cleanly, which changes how thick the glow appears and how well thin structures hold shape in the field. The non-gravitational push tells us to check the ephemeris often and expect small, polite changes that can be absorbed into the next night's plan. Walk the route with me at an easy pace. From far out, the inbound lane looks almost straight. There is very little bend until the sun's neighbourhood draws near. As the bend increases, the days shorten between updates, because the traveller covers more sky per night. If the inclination is steep, the turn might carry it across star fields we do not often watch for comets, which means charts and habits are refreshed, and that refreshment, handled slowly, is its own kind of comfort. We are not on autopilot, but we are not hurried either. Near the bend's tightest point, the open road swings across the brightest districts of daylight, where elongation shrinks and the view can be difficult from Earth's surface. This is where handrail 2 earns its keep, because a higher or lower lane might give a brief window in dawn or dusk when the background is darker, or might shift the task to instruments that can tolerate the glare a little better. The one-way nature of the trip helps here as well. The window will not repeat, so the schedule becomes a calm, single arc that crests and falls with the pass. As days spill into the outbound lane, the same 3 grips keep the path steady in mind. The leftover speed means no long-tail chase through a second season. The tilt means the traveller can slip back toward quieter sky quickly, making the faint stages cleaner than the bright ones. The small thrusters mean we keep an eye on residual drift, not as a worry, but as a habit, like checking mile markers to be sure the map still matches the road. All along, there is a 4th, softer handrail that doesn't need a name: geometry. Where we stand relative to the sun and the traveller changes how the road looks. A shallow phase angle makes the coma seem smooth. A larger angle brings out texture and forward scatter. These are not exceptions. They are the language of the route. We read them the way a walker reads the slant of a hill and the direction of shadows, and we let those cues tell us when to linger and when to move on. You may notice how these grips keep the narrative from fraying into too many small claims. They pull the story toward simple checks. Is the path open? Is the lane tilted? Is there a steady, modelable push from gas? Once those are held, we can add detail without losing the road. We can talk about jets and grains and colour threads as passing scenery, returning to the handrails if the view grows busy, the way a traveller on a new line keeps one hand on the rail when the train enters a crowded station. There is comfort, too, in how the handrails talk to the devices. Excess speed sets the time frame for infrared to listen early and for visible light to pick up the line as the glow builds. Inclination instructs wide-field cameras where to sweep and tells coronagraph watchers whether a near-sun crossing is even plausible. The small non-gravitational push prompts the ephemeris keeper to nudge tomorrow's pointing by a fraction, so a narrow slit finds the same core it found yesterday. And the count continues without a stutter, and here is the long thought you can lean on. Because the math that writes these corrections has been tested on many comets over many apparitions, and because the differences between local and interstellar travellers are handled in the same calm ledger of forces and light. The whole practice of following a visitor through the inner sky becomes less like chasing a surprise and more like keeping a tidy travel log in which each entry, from angle to airglow to instrument handoff, falls into place with the gentle rhythm of a known road that we happen to be walking for the first time at this hour. If a night offers clouds, the handrails stay put. If the wind is quiet and the stars are sharp, they still stay put. They are part of the route, not the weather. Hold them lightly when the mind grows busy. Check them once before sleep and once after you wake. The open path reminds you there's no loop to worry over. The tilt reminds you that new lanes can be learned by looking. The small push reminds you that small, steady changes add up, in the sky as in us, to a course that makes sense by degrees rather than by declarations. When instruments trade places, the road does not break. One device finishes its measures and rests. Another takes the line where it was left, and the count continues. That is the quiet beauty of a choreography designed for a one-way journey. It makes room for each watcher to step in, step out, and pass the grip along without hurry, while the path holds steady in the common notebook, and the next marker waits exactly where it should, ready for the next pair of hands to note it and move on. The spectrograph ticks once. Follow one colour for a while. Let it be green, the kind that sits between grass and jade when the night is gentle and the eye is not rushed. In the field, that green can feel like a thread laid through the dark, thin, but sure enough to hold. Vision has its tempos. In low light, rods carry most of the load, and they do not name colours. They register brightness with a peak sensitivity near blue-green that slides as the scene dims. When the glow strengthens, cones begin to help, and the world gathers hue again. This shift, the quiet drift of what appears brightest as the night deepens and then lightens, is part of why a green coma seems to hover rather than shout. It sits close to the eye's most comfortable place in the dark and agrees to be seen without effort. Now let light become chemistry. In the coma, small carbon molecules soak up sunlight and release it again as their own narrow bands. Diatomic carbon paints much of the green, a set of lines that add up to the tint, the way fine threads add up to a stripe. Cyanogen joins in nearby parts of the spectrum. Farther toward violet, other fragments take their turns. Nothing here needs a spotlight. It is a crowd of modest contributors, led by one that happens to sit where our eyes are ready to listen. Because this is fluorescence, the green is an action, not a stain. Parent molecules lifted from the surface are broken by sunlight, and daughters and granddaughters glow for short lives before breaking again or drifting outward where the light no longer drives them. The hue is rebuilt each moment from new arrivals. It thickens nearer the heart, where the feed is strong, and softens outward where the flow thins, like a single line traced by many hands that all know the same small curve by memory. Color can change with angle, even when chemistry holds steady. At shallow phase, forward scattered dust makes a smooth wash that can mask fine tints. Under larger phase, the grain of texture emerges, and the green thread stands out more clearly against a darker field. Filters and cameras matter too. An instrument tuned for a narrow set of lines will show a firmer stripe than a broadband eye that blends many regions into one. Both are true to themselves, the way a lamp and a window both tell the presence of daylight in different tones. The thread is useful, but humble. A green coma suggests a carbon family at work and a healthy rate of sunlight meeting fresh material. Yet, it does not, by itself, name a birthplace, or settle a story about metals or deep layers. It is a pointer toward conditions, not a signature that says, "from here." If we try to make color carry more than it can, the scene grows noisy. Kept to its role, it calms the reading of everything else. Look where the tint is strongest. Near the nucleus, the glow can be richer and softer at once, as if the line were painted with a wider brush. Outward, it fades faster than the dust light, because the fragments that provide the color are short-lived and must be renewed from within. This is why a green halo can look compact around a larger, paler haze. The tint belongs to chemistry with quick steps. The pale belongs to grains that keep reflecting until distance and time slow their part. Some nights, ultraviolet from the sun is a more insistent coach. When that part of the spectrum runs bright, certain lines lift a little. When it slacks, they settle. Even without numbers, you can imagine the ledger. Input here, output there, always in balance. The eye feels the result as a slightly deeper tone or a lighter one, and the hand at the instrument records the same change with counts instead of adjectives. Because color and brightness live together, they can trick a hurried reader. A scene that looks greener may only be darker and nearer to the eye's favored sensitivity. A scene that looks paler may be brighter and pushing the rods aside long enough for cones to speak with more nuance. The cure for the trick is simple: patience and cross-checks. Narrow filters, repeated exposures, and the company of other wavelengths keep the map honest and the mind unruffled. There is also a question that floats at the edge of any tint. Does this green ever come from anything else? In the sky above us, an oxygen line near the same region paints the night with its own soft stripe when air glow is kind. Around comets, atomic oxygen has its lines too, though the classic green of a coma is more often the work of carbon pairs and their brief kin. Knowing that both can sing close to each other teaches modesty. The spectrum is a choir, not a soloist, and careful listening sorts the voices without fuss. Trace the thread outward and watch it thin. Where dust and color begin together, dust can carry on alone. The tail keeps the sun's light in a broad hand, scattering it in white that leans warm or cool depending on grain sizes and angles. The green falls away sooner, like a melody that gives the rhythm back to the accompaniment once its verse is done. The shape this makes is restful, a center with hue, a reach with tone, and between them a gentle grade rather than a sharp border. If you imagine the scene in time rather than space, the same story holds. At the start of warming, carbon-bearing fragments are early voices. As the day repeats and the object draws closer, water and other volatiles join, and the balance among hues and brightnesses shifts. Later, after the near turn, the stronger voices quiet and the subtler ones remain until they too drift, below hearing. Long exposure stacks these changes into a record that holds steadier than memory, and that record lets the night crew compare one gentle phrase with the next without leaning on guesswork or wish. A small comfort waits in the way these colours meet the devices that care for them. Visible spectrographs lay the green bands cleanly across the sensor like threads placed on a loom. Ultraviolet instruments catch the parents and early daughters and show where the energy first enters the weave. Infrared keeps watch on the warmth that sets the motion going. Each adds a piece, and the color line we began with becomes both a guide and a check. If it strengthens without a partner strengthening nearby, we ask for a better look. If it fades along with the rest, we nod and mark the page. Sometimes the world under your ceiling echoes this harmony. A dim indicator on a charger casts a faint green that seems brighter when the room is darkest, then retreats into the background as dawn brings its own bluish wash, and your eyes change their mix of sensors without you ever issuing a command. The physics is the same shape, sensitivity shifting with the light, modest sources gaining or yielding notice as the scene changes around them. Nothing abrupt required to explain a story that unfolds by degrees and ends with an ease that feels earned, because every step made sense as it happened, without you having to carry any step forward by force. Return to the thread now. Let it run from core to halo, then taper into the wider pail. Hold it lightly so it can lead without tugging. When it guides you past a region where texture takes over, let the green be a memory rather than an insistence. The eye will remember enough, and the instruments will remember more. And between those two memories, the picture will hold long after the colour itself has thinned, as the tint gives way to a quieter grey-blue, and the whole field cools to a softer tone that invites the next breath in silence. We take the narrow channel at walking speed, not to beat the tide, only to feel how the current gathers as the sun's waters pinch. I keep one hand on the rail and name the buoys as we pass. The glare stays to starboard. We do not look straight into it. We steer by the darker water ahead. Step 1 is approach, where instruments reef their sails, shutters shorten, filters deepen. Guiders avoid lines too close to the bright shoal. On decks in orbit and on mountaintops ashore, crews check stray light charts the way a pilot checks a harbour note. They trim exposure so highlights do not wash the log, and they route around reflections that slip in from the sun's broad wake. Nothing theatrical, just seamanship. Know what the lens can weather, and choose a lane that keeps the hull in calm water. Step 2 is cadence, a slow oarstroke of spectra. Time series work is a ferry gliding back and forth across the same short reach, counting the wake each crossing leaves behind. A quiet rhythm, sample, settle, sample, let small changes stand clear of the chop. If a line rises with the warm tide, it will rise again on the next pass. If it falls when the light banks, the fall will repeat. That is the value of keeping to one course while the scene turns through its own tides. Step 3 is the turn itself, the close pass where the channel narrows and the sun throws spray. Here, the duet of tails often parts cleanly. Dust broadens like foam spread by pressure, while ions pull into a narrow stream that runs with the magnetic current. Shapes alter by the minute when currents shear, but they do so in ways that match old pilot charts from other passages. We recognize the eddies, the small kinks, the smoothers after a gust. It is the same sea, played on a new hull. At the bend, shore rules apply. Some decks must not point too near the glare. Their bright limits are marked in the book. Others can work closer, but only with shields in place, like bringing a canopy low over the wheel. Ground crews switch to dawn or dusk windows when the sun rides low and the sky's chop is less. Spaceborne watchers coordinate handoffs so the log stays continuous, even if one vessel must stand off for a watch. The point is not bravado. The point is an unbroken track through a bright corner. Step 4 is the ease that follows. Once past the headland, the current spreads and slows. The glow crests, then settles. The ion stream loses its tightness as the driver wanes. The dust lane carries the last of the light farther, a broad wake fading into open water. We keep sounding the depth, because the drop tells us which ices still lift and which have sunk back into the hull. Cooling has a sound of its own, the creak of timbers easing, the hush when the bow wave falls away. Because the corridor is busy, a lookout minds the charts of geometry as much as the engine. Elongation, the angle that tells how far from the sun the target rides, opens again after the turn, and that makes the sea darker for us, even as the traveller's own lantern dims. There is comfort in that exchange. We trade brightness for contrast, and still come away with a readable log. Walking pace helps. A slow traverse lets thin features remain features, rather than smears stretched by haste. Along this slow walk, calibration is the rope along the gunwale. Flats and darks, arcs and standards, simple knots that keep the line true when the boat pitches. If a slit must be widened to catch more of the wake, the note goes in the margin, and the next night repeats the choice, so comparisons are fair. If a coronagraph peaks the object just inside its limb, the frame time is kept short so the chop does not blur the stream. All of this is the same craft you would use in a narrow tidal river. Small, regular adjustments that keep you off the bank. Some days the channel throws a trick. Thin cloud, a gust of solar weather, a glint that sneaks into a lens at the wrong angle. We mark it. We shift a meter to port, and we keep the log. Data that cannot be trusted is never thrown to the deep. It is tied to the cleat called context, so its place is known without being asked to pull weight it cannot bear, which is how quiet voyages stay quiet, and how long crossings are remembered for their line rather than any brief hitch at the helm. What we seek here is not a single wave, but the character of the water. Perihelion is a strait. Currents fasten. The hull answers in ways we can read. Warming raises the vapor. Vapor carries dust. Dust and ions sort themselves by the sea they prefer. Across hours, that story writes itself in tidy measures, and across days it writes larger arcs that, when read together, explain not only how this passage went, but how passages go in general. And that knowledge becomes the pilot's book for the next trip, already weathered and already calming to the hand that opens it. because every mark was made at a measured speed with eyes unhurried, and a crew that learned to let the ship and the water teach the rules rather than forcing a rule where none was needed, and because that patience is the very reason why the ship returns to harbour with a log that reads as simply as a child's tide table, even after nights that asked for many small choices and many steady breaths under a bright, demanding sky. By step 5, the pace is yours again. The channel widens behind us. The visitor's lantern drops toward a quieter glimmer. Instruments lengthen exposures, then shorten again as we trade resolution for reach, taking what detail the sea will give and not asking for what it won't. The wake becomes a line only the practiced eye sees. Then it too blurs into the larger swell. We make one last check of the buoys, cadence kept, bright limits respected, tail shapes described, cool down logged. The current eases off our keel. In the dark beyond the strait, the water is open and kind, and the night says you can put your hands in your pockets and stroll the rest of the way along the quay. At the threshold of the dark field, I rest my hand on the frame. I'm writing you a quiet note, the kind you unfold at night when the room is its own soft weather. If anything feels heavy, let it fog and lift. I'll keep the words light and even, like breath-meeting cool air, and turn into a brief mist you can see. You asked, in your way, why we watch travellers from beyond our neighbourhood. I keep an answer in my pocket for nights like this. These bodies carry old air in their pores and old frost in their seams. When sunlight touches them, that age exhales, and the exhale sketches how other systems once felt. We don't need a grand statement. We need a page where faint writing appears when the warm hand of a star passes over it. A few winters ago we met one that showed almost no haze at all, no clear plume, just light that flickered in a way that suggested an odd shape and a dry skin. Not long after, another arrived and breathed like a comet. We already knew, steady and instructive. Between the two, the category Interstellar became less of a headline and more of a shelf in a quiet library. This new visitor is another slim book that the stacks were waiting for, and it belongs beside the others without drama. I want you to picture how much of us is shared with those books. The carbon we speak with, the oxygen we lean on, the iron that sets the colour of our blood, all formed in stars and their endings, then drifted, mixed, and folded into worlds. When we read A Traveller's Light, we are reading relatives. The kinship is not romantic, it is practical and kind. It says the recipes are common, even when the kitchens are far apart, and that is a good thought to fall asleep to. There is a way the work itself answers loneliness too. The sky is large, but the ledger that holds these measurements is open to everyone with a steady hand and a patient sensor. Positions arrive at a small clearinghouse, times and counts are compared, pointing maps are refined in public view. A person on a hillside with a modest mirror can add a datum that improves the path kept by an observatory on another continent. Mist meets mist. The picture clears. Tonight's letter also wants to tell you about practice for tomorrow. Engineers are refining a way to wait in deep space with a modest craft, and then leap toward the next new traveller, whichever one the surveys discover. It's an elegant idea. Don't send a ship to a named guest yet, but keep a ship poised to meet the first guest who arrives when the door opens. The value is obvious and quiet. Samples may not come home at first, but close readings will, and those readings will teach us how to meet the next visitor with surer hands. In the meantime, the instruments we already have are enough to make a long, useful mist of knowledge that settles gently over the subject. Infrared warms the page from beneath so the invisible ink rises. Visible light traces the edges where the plume thickens and thins. Radio listens for narrow syllables that molecules can't help but speak when they turn in place. Each band adds moisture to the air of understanding, and the letters become easier to make out. I am careful with words like origin and cause in letters like this. They are large words, and they like to push. A better way, under a late lamp, is to say we can bracket possibilities and mark the margins with pencil. Some tints point toward colder cradles. Others point toward places that stayed warm longer. Some dust looks as if it was knitted from fine strands. Other dust looks as if it broke off coarser blocks. These are not pronouncements. They are drifts that settle, and we compare how they lie from night to night. What makes the whole enterprise gentle is how rarely it asks for faith. The archives are open. You can see the counts and the times, the slits and the filters, the notes in the margins when thin cloud passed, or a guiding star was awkwardly placed. Collaboration is not a slogan. It is the way the picture forms. No single mirror holds the scene. A dozen join their faint traces, and together they make a sheet you can read without squinting. There is, too, the simple comfort that none of this is a warning. The path is an open sweep that will not touch us. Gravity handles the encounter with the same unflustered strength it uses to hold the moon. I am telling you this plainly, so the mind can loosen its grip where it doesn't need to hold. Let the facts do their work. Let worry evaporate like dew when the first light reaches the sill. If the future brings a mission that can meet such a traveller in person, the drawings on the drafting tables will come from these quiet nights. Which wavelengths mattered most? Which angles gave the best reading? How fast the brightness rose or fell near a close turn? How small forces nudged the path? Nothing is wasted in a campaign like this. Even the frames where the visitor did not appear teach us the boundaries of glare, the behavior of our own instruments, the patience of our teams. I promised a letter and not a lecture, so I will close the book for now. The air in the room has that slight weight it takes on before rest. If you lift a hand, you can feel it. If you leave the hand still, you can imagine seeing it as a faint curl above your skin in colder air, a secret made visible for a heartbeat. That is all our traveller is doing out there, turning its hidden air into a brief script we can see, then letting that script dissolve back into the larger night as the heating passes and the path opens away from our star. And in that dissolving there is no loss, only the right ending for a note written in mist and delivered to anyone awake enough to read it by a small light without feeling the need to underline a single word. You can set the letter down now. The night will keep it for you. The lab keeps a low tide after midnight. Monitors dim to a harbour light, and the hum of cooling fans sounds like water against pilings. I sit with a mug that has forgotten its heat, the notebook open to a fresh line, and the sky's latest messages gathering in the queue like small boats easing toward their slips. Time stamps arrive first, clean and quiet. Each carries a position, a brightness, and a measure of how sure that brightness is. They stack in order, and I read them the way a keeper reads a tide table, looking for the turn, noting the slack, then the rise. The ephemeris sits beside them, a chart that rolls forward as new points are folded in. the open curve of the traveller sharpened 1 fractional degree at a time. This is watch standing more than anything else. One hand keeps the clock, the other keeps the log. Handoffs move through the night with a sailor's politeness. A dome in the west signs off. Another, on a different longitude, takes the watch. An orbiting instrument sends a brief note across the wire before it shifts to a scheduled target. I imagine this old practice of passing a brass tally at the change of guard. This frame started here, this one ended there, and the courtesy stands even if the hands are thousands of miles apart. The point is continuity. The line should read as one line when the book is closed. Data hygiene is our rope along the rail. Bias frames take out the camera's whisper. Darks remove the long exhale. Flats smooth away the lens's faint thumbprints. Photometric standards set the night's zero, and the scatter tells us how calm the air truly was. We mark cirrus when it strays across a star. We forgive a guiding hiccup if it is small and known. Outliers are not troublemakers. They are notes in the margin that say the water chopped for a minute and then settled again. Cross-checks steady the route. A visible image lines up with a slit position from an infrared spectrograph, and the counts hum the same tune. Radio lines reported earlier in the day appear where the model says they should, a soft confirmation that the molecules we thought would speak are indeed speaking. When 2 bands disagree, we do not scold them. We lay their pages side by side and add a quiet question to the list for next watch, the kind that can wait without tugging at anyone's sleeve. Modelling begins when the room knows its own breath. Gas is given a simple shape first, a parent cloud that births daughters, and those daughters their own, each with a modest lifetime under sunlight. Dust is given a small fleet of sizes, launched from a few gentle ports. The light pressure sorts them. The turn of the body lays a faint spiral in the inner harbour. If a jet is needed, it is drawn with a pencil from a latitude and a time of day, then tested against the arc of brightness in the images. A 3-dimensional plume rises inside the machine, and we walk around it slowly to see if it casts the same shadow as the one we measure on our screens. The path itself gets a sailor's correction. Non-gravitational pushes are added the way a navigator allows for a steady current. 1 small term along the track, 1 across, 1 out of the plane. So the predicted point for tomorrow lands where tonight's centre of light truly was. Residuals fall like spray, thin, and even when we have the flow right, a little choppier when a vent wakes or rests. There is no impatience in this adjustment. A curve that breathes is still a curve that can be followed. Quality is not a verdict, it is a practice. I check the residuals of star positions after the plate solution, and let their RMS tell me whether the field was tight. I read the night's 0-point drift like a barometer. I open the headers to be sure the clocks agreed. If a line is faint, I compare it to a standard lamp taken before dawn. If a line is strong, I check that it is not a ghost raised by optics. When the answers are plain, I write fair or good or very good and leave the rest to the next set of eyes. When the pace slows, we turn to the ledgers that keep the voyage from being only a night's work. Files are packed into the public hold where others can take their share. Images to a sky archive, spectra to a mission hub, numbers to the catalogue that binds small bodies to their ephemerides. Metadata is the map folded in with the cargo. Where, how, which filters, which slits, which weather, which mind, at which desk. Years from now, someone will unroll these maps and sail the same waters by a different moon. The best part of the long night is its patience. A graduate student across an ocean can pull a frame I took and measure the same curve I saw in the halo. A team on a ridge can compare their millimeter line to our infrared drift and decide that a jet turned by a few degrees after midnight. A person with a small telescope can add a time and a place that nudge the orbit 0.3 of an arc-second nearer to where it truly runs. It is a harbour where every lamp makes the channel safer. When the queue empties, I sweep the desk the way you coil a line before going ashore. The harbour light of the screens softens. The traveller's curve holds steady on the chart. One more hour older and a little farther down the outbound reach. I sign the log and set the pen on its side so the ink can rest. In the corridor, the building hums like a ship at anchor, and out past the glass, the night is the same water we always sail, quiet, serviceable, and generous with those who move at a measured speed. I set the dial to night. We walked a calm corridor together. From the first soft green around a compact heart, we followed light made by simple chemistry under a nearby star. We let instruments take turns, infrared listening for warmth, visible counting brightness, radio noting narrow lines, while a quiet network kept the watch in even shifts. We watched dust and ions part like two currents, one broad, one thin, both obeying the space between. We let small pulses tell of breathing vents and slow rotation. We held 3 handrails, open speed, tilted lane, and the small push of gas, so the map never slipped. Nothing asked for hurry. The near pass was a narrow channel, bright but navigable, with short exposures, deep filters, and steady cadence. After the turn, the glow gentled, and we stayed long enough to hear the fade. In the night shift lab, we filed timestamps like tide marks, checked the rope work of calibration, shaped a modest plume in software, and sent the data to harbours where others will dock and read. That is how a traveller from far away becomes part of our quiet ledger, by small entries that agree. If you are drifting now, let the story keep its own pace. A green thread thins toward blue. Tails loosen, the curve bends outward and goes on. The sky remains patient, and the instruments sleep with one eye open. Thank you for sharing the watch. May your room hold its soft weather, your breathing find its slow rhythm, and your dreams take the gentlest lane. Good night, and good rest.